Welcome to Amici, News and Insight from the New York Courts. I'm John Carr. For the July Diversity Dialogue segment, we were joined by the Honorable Rowan D. Wilson, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals and the State of New York. Today we're pleased and honored to welcome the Honorable Joseph A. Zayas, who, as a Chief Administrative Judge, holds the highest administrative position in the state judiciary. He manages a budget of $3.3 billion and oversees 3,600 judges and about 15,000 non-judicial employees scattered throughout some 300 courthouses in 62 counties. Judge Zayas' appointment in May made history. He is the first Latino ever to serve as Chief Administrative Judge. Judge Zayas, the product of a housing project in West Harlem, was once principal law clerk to another trailblazer, the Honorable Rolando Acosta, who recently retired as presiding justice of the Appellate Division, First Department. A graduate of Fordham University and Columbia University School of Law, Judge Zayas was admitted to the bar in 1989. He spent many years working with the Legal Aid Society in the Criminal Division and the Capital Defense Unit before clerking for Justice Acosta. He has been a judge since 2003, when he was appointed to the New York City Criminal Court by Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and subsequently served as an acting Supreme Court Justice, a judge of the Court of Claims, a Supreme Court judge, an administrative judge, and most recently as an Associate Justice of the Appellate Division, Second Department. Judge Zayas, thank you for your time today. Today I'd like to look a little beyond the resume and learn a little more about the man inside the robes. So let's start at the beginning if we could. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Manhattan. We lived in the Frederick Douglass housing projects. I was born and raised in the Frederick Douglass housing projects, which is 103rd Street, Columbus and Amsterdam. Went to public schools there and lived there probably until I was about 12 or 13. It was, I didn't know that it was the public projects at the time. I thought I lived in a great neighborhood, But yeah, I was born in '62. My mother and father had 5 sons, and it was an exciting time. And my mother essentially did most of the raising. I don't want to say she's a single parent because my dad was around, but my dad, we knew very early on that my dad had a very serious mental illness. And so he was always in and out of psychiatric institutions later in life. My brothers sort of had to figure out how to get my dad committed, what buzzwords we needed to tell the police and the people that responded to things he was doing. But he was, had schizophrenia. And so we were raised in that environment, but with an extremely loving mother. Even though we grew up in poverty, my mother was on welfare for a short period of time. I never felt unloved in that environment and never really realized I was poor until later on in life,
But still,
So,
you grew up with a father with a severe mental illness, a mother on welfare. How did that affect you as a child? Or were you even cognizant that it was unusual?
Yeah, that's the thing is sometimes it's been very interesting to me that some folks go through these really traumatic events in their life, and then they become adults and there's sort of, at least seemingly, no discernible effect on them, like my mom, just like a lot of moms in those days in these communities would, she was trying to raise 5 boys, right? And she was a strong woman, but she would not hesitate to give us a beating here and there. Some people say, oh, that's scarred. And I agree. It does cause trauma and it triggers some people in their adulthood. But for me and my brothers, none of us sort of felt that, maybe just because we had no doubt about the love that my mother and father had for us. So we grew up poor. We grew up in these difficult circumstances, but we felt like we were raised in a very loving home. Like I have three kids now, and they refer to my mom. My mom passed away when she was 60, but she had a lot of, I think she had 12 grandkids by the time she passed away.
Wow.
And the word on her is she was the one who showed unconditional love to everybody. She taught love and acceptance, etc. And she was an incredible matriarch for the family, and taught tolerance. I had a gay brother, and we all knew that. And this is in the 70s, right? And I have just a distinct memory that his partner, my brother's partner, they were teenagers, came to our house one day, our apartment, and was beaten up badly. Two black eyes, scar, lacerations, etc., crying, and his father had kicked him out of the house when he came out, when he told them that he was gay. And my mother, it was pretty amazing to me that in the 70s she did this, but my mother took in my brother's partner into our home and had him live with us for a while. And so that's what that's the type of things that we sort of learned growing up. Like you love people, you're kind to people, you always be good to people, and you cannot hate. I remember once saying, I hate that teacher, and boy, I got a smack right upside the head. You're like, don't you ever say you hate anybody. We love people. And so that's how I was raised. We were in this environment, rough community, public schools, but there was a lot of love, and somehow my mom figured out how to keep us out of trouble, how to keep us busy.
It sounds like she was obviously a tremendous influence. I mean, just thinking of all this woman was trying to balance: poverty, a mentally ill husband, 5 children, a son who is gay at a time where that is not really socially acceptable,
Right,
and somehow she balanced all that.
I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it, but that's just what happened. That's the type of mother I had, and my father was loving too. He was just so anxious. He was just so nervous all the time, and I'm sure that had effects on us too. Like if we were walking with him, he would never go through the front of the building, because there were always in the projects. There's always somebody hanging out in front of the building, and he always wanted to avoid them. So he would always enter through the basement so that he didn't have to have contact with people. If we had a knock at the door, he wouldn't let us answer it until he hid in one of the bedrooms. So I'm sure that there was some effects of that. Like, I don't know how that affected us, but yeah, I mean, that's basically the environment we grew up in. Yeah.
Now, after high school, it seems like you bounced around a bit. You were at CUNY Bronx Community College for a while, SUNY New Paltz, SUNY Binghamton, and ultimately Fordham. What's going on in your life at this point?
So let me tell you the backstory, because I went to a high school called Norman Thomas High School, and it was a brand new high school, and this is what New York City was doing with developers. So if a developer wanted to develop a high-rise office building in Manhattan, they would sort of get concessions that they would put it, like in this situation, they allowed a brand new school to be built on 33rd and Park, right? Prime real estate. But the first 7 floors had to be devoted to a high school. And so that's the high school that I went to. And but it was a lot of city kids, all public school city kids. It wasn't one of the specialty high schools, and it's where I met my wife. And we've been married 40 years now. But I'll tell you what happened. I was a very smart kid, but there were 5. It was so many kids in the school that you had to have 5 separate lunch periods, right, to stagger them. I had 1 lunch period, right? That was assigned to me, or maybe it was 4 lunch periods, but they brought a DJ into our lunch periods for the 5 periods. Like they allowed a DJ to play music and even strobe lights, and there was salsa dancing and everything. And that's where the party was happening during school. So what happened was, um, I went to the classes in the morning. I went to my lunch period, and I went to everyone else's lunch period, right? So just because I wanted to be around the people, I wanted to dance and do the things I did. So in high school, in my 10th and 11th grade, I passed 4 classes with 95s, 97s, right? I got A's in the classes I attended. And then, but there was always 3 classes that for some reason, if you didn't show up to those classes, they didn't give you a 0, they gave you a 40. So somehow I wound up with like a 71 point average in high school. In the 11th grade, I had a English teacher, and she somehow, helped me to get back on track. The thing she suggested was that I read the New York Times every day. So she would give me her copy of the New York Times, and because I fell behind on all sorts of things, vocabulary, current events, history, all of those things. And that's what I did. I loved reading the New York Times. I was religiously reading it every single day. I missed the classics like that most high school students would read. But I read the Times, and that sort of made me start doing better. So in the 11th and the 12th grade, the second part of the 11th grade, I did better. And then eventually, when I applied to colleges, you can't get into a 4-year college, at least in the CUNY system. So I could only get into Bronx Community College. Got there, got 4 A's, immediately transferred to SUNY New Paltz, got 4 A's or close to that, and then transferred to SUNY Binghamton, which Harper College, that was a big deal in those days. I thought that's where I would wind up staying. I told you earlier that I met my wife in high school. Mm-hmm. So that's the great thing that happened about that whole disco thing, because I had a chance to meet my wife, and we're celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary in a few weeks. But she also went to SUNY Buffalo, and eventually I was at SUNY Binghamton, she was at SUNY Buffalo, and we decided, let's go back to New York City where we wanted to live, and that's how I wound up at Fordham.
And when did you first consider becoming a lawyer?
So as I said, I was an avid reader of the New York Times as a young man, 10th grade, 11th grade, and I just recall reading so many of the social interest stories, social justice stories. And I remember stories about legal aid attorneys fighting for their indigent clients. I remembered civil rights issues, police brutality questions, and got really interested in becoming a lawyer and doing that type of work just from reading what was happening in the city, and the different things that legal aid attorneys were doing, civil rights lawyers were doing. And then sort of decided at some point that I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer.
And then, obviously, you gravitated to criminal law. You handled a variety of cases, including death penalty cases for the Legal Aid Society. Why criminal defense as opposed to other civil rights law?
Well, first of all, at Fordham, I took a constitutional law class, so that also cemented wow, I really want to do civil rights work. So my first summer after my first year of Columbia Law School, I got an internship with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and just loved the work they were doing. They were doing all sorts of work. But in the meantime, I had already, first month of law school, I had a daughter, right? I got married in college, had a daughter very early on, first month of law school. And it became, as much as I was excited about all of that work, and I was working with the, civil rights icons of the day. I realized that civil rights work, at least that type of work with the Legal Defense Fund, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, was going to require me to travel to the states where they were doing affirmative litigation, such as Georgia and Missouri, wherever they were bringing their actions, and those lawyers I saw were leaving for 3 or 4 weeks to do a trial and going to Mississippi and Alabama and all of these states where that most of their lawsuits were happening. And so I thought, wow, I'm not sure I'm ready to do that. I have a young family, and this really wasn't in the plans for me. So I started to think about another area. I loved writing, and so I started to think about another area, and I did an internship with the Legal Aid Society's Appeals Bureau. And I realized that criminal law, every aspect of criminal law involves, the Bill of Rights. So, the First Amendment issue. Every criminal case has a Fourth Amendment issue, a Fifth Amendment issue, a Sixth Amendment issue, 14th Amendment, and I realized, well, wow, this sounds like an alternative where I can do constitutional law. Even First Amendment, there's so many issues in all of these amendments and the Bill of Rights, and I decided, I think this is what I want to do. And I love writing. And eventually, like, it was just amazing to me how quickly I was able to do things. You sometimes you hear that lawyers never get to set foot in a courtroom, and graduated from Columbia, but I was a nervous lawyer who was a little insecure and all of that, but it was pretty amazing to me the opportunities I received right out of law school. So I started working for the Legal Aid Society's Criminal Appeals Bureau. I argued a case in the first department probably within 4 or 5 months of graduating. I got admitted in '89. And I get a call from, I couldn't believe it. I get a call from Judge Judith K, basically on a leave application that I had filed, and asking her to come to her chambers with the prosecutor to argue this leave application. I was a kid, John. I was literally brand new lawyer, and I remember going to her chambers. And now, when I visit the great Chief Judge Rowan Wilson, it's in that same building, so I returned to the place where I went from '89, you're talking about, 30 years ago, and got leave granted and argued a case in the Court of Appeals within 8 or 9 months of my admission to the bar.
That's incredible.
You just couldn't believe it. And then wound up arguing 5 cases in the Court of Appeals during my time with Legal Aid, and about 60 cases in the appellate division. Wow. And just felt, so like I couldn't believe I was doing this incredibly important work as a young lawyer.
Yeah, you got incredible experience very, very early in your career. Now, your interaction with Judge K, obviously she granted leave. How did she impress you? Oh,
I was completely enamored by her because I had read her decisions. Just the fact that a young, my background, young Puerto Rican kid growing up in the projects, going to Columbia, feeling a little insecure, going to an Ivy League, and the idea that I was having a meeting with the Chief Judge of New York was just, and she was so sweet and kind and welcoming and calming, it was just wonderful, just a wonderful experience.
And you've said that the most important quality a judge brings to the bench is empathy, while drawing a distinction between empathy and sympathy. Can you unpack that for me? What does that mean?
Yeah, so when President Obama was about to name a Supreme Court judge, and Judge Sotomayor was on the short list, someone asked him at a news conference, so tell me, what are the great qualities that you'd be looking for in the next Supreme Court judge? And he used that word, empathy, among other attributes, right? And I thought, wow, that's an interesting, because I had always thought it, but I never heard anybody else articulate it, right? And so what happened after that is a lot of news reporters, there was a lot of articles that said, what does empathy have to do with the judge? That sounds like he's suggesting that judges who are going to be proactive. They suggested that meant he was going to that the judge was going to sympathize with the underdog in every case, et cetera, and there was sort of a misinterpretation of that. Man, I wish I could remember the name of the columnist for the New York Times, where he then came out in defense of Obama's statement and basically said, of course, empathy is one of the most important qualities, because judges, by the nature of their work, and even the requirements of some of the standards that they're required to apply, involves you putting yourself in the shoes of one of the litigants. I mean, that the reasonable person test is an example of that. If somebody raises a justification defense, you have to put yourself in the shoes of that person. You think about, especially in the criminal law, but this happens in the civil law too. It's the reasonable person standard. How could you put yourself in the shoes? How could you come up with what a reasonable person should have done under those circumstances without empathy, right? But what I have always seen it as, no, this is not just putting yourself in the shoes of a litigant who is the underdog, but also putting yourself in the shoes of the litigant when it comes to like a police officer, for example, who is walking down a dark alley, and the fear that officer's fear too has to be reasonably related to the situation. So I really appreciated that. It doesn't mean that it carries the day necessarily, but the idea that you're able to put you're able to empathize with a litigant is to me critical, and that's why having broad experience when you talk about the purposes of a diverse bench, right? There are some people. I'll give an example. There's some people, like some judges might listen to some testimony about public housing projects, right? If they've never been to a public housing project, right, they have an image in their head about what that is, right? So it might be hard for them to sort of imagine what that scene is like, right? But for somebody who comes in who, I've not only been to public housing projects, but my niece still lives in one, and I go to her, her baby shower, and I go to my other aunt who's still living there. When I hear that testimony, it might mean something different to me, right? And I might, the more information you have along those lines, the more I think your rulings would be congruous with the right result or a better outcome.
When the chief judge was on the program recently, he made the point that diversity means not just ethnic diversity, but diversity of experience. I think that's what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. And my view is that it actually, and I know there's a lot of reasons, a lot of people have set forth a lot of reasons why it's important. For me, the most important reason for diversity, the most important thing that it brings is that it increases the quality of the justice that gets dispensed. So the more diverse backgrounds that we have on the bench, the better the quality of justice, because all of those perspectives are now injected into the process. This is an analogy I use. The Sixth Amendment talks about a defendant's right to a jury of his peers, right? Those words aren't in the Constitution, jury of his peers, but that's what that has been interpreted, that a fair cross-section of the community, right? So if the Constitution is starting with this premise that the best justice, the fairest justice, the most impartial way to reach a just result is that those who are judging, who are doing the judgment, jurors, need to be from all diverse backgrounds and a fair cross section of the community, right? So for I mean, that to me says that, and is, from my perspective, good grounds to believe that the Constitution supports the idea that judges too must be diverse. Because judges are fact finders too. And if jurors must be a diverse group, of course, judges must be a diverse group, because they don't do everything a juries don't do everything judges do. But certainly judges are fact finders, as are jurors. And if jurors have to be selected from for a fair cross section of the community, how could we say that judges don't have to be?
So the diversity and empathy seem to distinguish a judge from a robot and a juror from artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's true. Right.
Now, you have a lot of experience with what we call problem-solving courts: drug court, mental health court, youth court. What is the benefit and I guess the future of problem-solving courts?
So, as a litigator, right? So when I did trials, I almost always tried to reach a disposition with my client to enter whether it was a drug treatment, and this was the 90s, drug treatment. They didn't have mental health courts in those days, but a drug treatment court, because, if I knew my client had a drug problem, I could solve his case that doesn't involve that problem, in a variety of ways. But I always felt like that defendant was going to be coming back to me if I don't get to the core of that person's problem. So early on in my career as a trial lawyer in the trial courts, after I did appeals, I was a strong believer in it. And so when I became a judge, I asked to be assigned to the treatment court in Queens. We did misdemeanors. And, it was just, to me, the best outcome for everyone. Sometimes people, mess up and they wind going to jail. But to divert people is the best thing in the world that could happen in any criminal case. And so, and I felt like I was, having grown up in the streets, so to speak, and growing up in the neighborhoods that most victims grew up, lived in, and most crimes were committed in, and defendants lived in. I felt like I was somewhat good at it, in terms of talking to defendants. I felt like I was able to do that in a way that was persuasive, and it just led to better results. So even if somebody can get a case resolved with like a short jail term, and then they don't have anything, and I was always the type that would, give defendants, another chance, a second chance, even a third or fourth chance, until sometimes when they got rearrested, and then that became the problem. But it was also very gratifying work. I mean, it's one thing to be a judge and put people in jail. Is, sometimes that's necessary where the defendant is, really dangerous and is going to, there's a determination made that he's a danger to the community. But it's very gratifying. I once had a lawyer come in, and he was watching me talk to one of the defendants, and he had his case called next, and he said, "Judge, that was a really impactful discussion you just had with that defendant. You must really sleep really well at night, And so, I mean, I once had a defendant who I put him in treatment. He would always come to court with his wife and their two kids in strollers, and he always did really well, always did perfect. And he appears once without his wife and without his two kids, and his wife had been pregnant during the most recent appearance. I said, "So where's Jackie? Where's your wife?" And where are the kids? He said, "Oh, Judge, I thought you knew. My wife gave birth, right?" And I don't know why I'm getting teary eyed about this, but he says to me, and Judge, I want to thank you because the other two kids that my wife gave birth to, my other two kids, I was never able to attend my children's birth. I didn't see it. In fact, when she gave birth, I probably didn't show up to the hospital until 2 days later. And I want to thank you for helping me to change my life. And this time, when she gave birth, I was there, and I had a chance to see I had a chance to see my son being born, and I had to leave the bench that day because he told that story, and I said, look, I forgot his name, but I said, look, judges are not allowed to cry on the bench, so I'm going to call a recess. I'll talk to you more about this again. But when stuff like that happens, I mean, judges are not in the business, like they're not firemen or firewomen or fire workers or police officers. So they're not in the business of rescuing people, right? We don't usually think of judges as rescuers, but judges in treatment courts are saving people's lives, And so I was always persuaded that it would lead to the best outcomes, and Judge Kay used to talk about the revolving door of justice. I really bought into that very heavily. Even before I became a judge, I worked with Judge Acosta, and he ran the Harlem Community Justice Center. And Judge Kay came to visit, and I reminded her that I appeared before her, in those days. But she's the one who would give talks about that a lot, about treatment court, community courts. And then I eventually founded the mental health court in Queens. It was the first mental health court for misdemeanor defendants in Queens, because what was happening was people were being referred to get assessed for drug treatment, and they were getting rejected from my drug treatment from my drug treatment court because of their mental health issues. So I thought, this is crazy. So what we need to do is set up a situation where if they can't get into drug treatment, we're going to create a mental health treatment court. And so that was my next project, and I did that. And I thought that court too was very effective, because a lot of the victims of defendants who have serious mental illness, the victims are typically people that the defendant knows. Not always, but sometimes it's an aunt, sometimes it's a neighbor, sometimes it's a family member. And typically the victims are the ones who really don't want their mentally ill neighbor to wind up in jail, So we always had it always seems like we had the victim on board to get the defendant to go into mental health treatment. And then I did the youth court, which was, also a wonderful thing, where we were able to avoid, the serious consequences of sending a young person to jail, and divert them to programs and get them back into school and all of that. So to me, that's I think a crowning achievement of the court system. These diversion courts, there's veterans courts, there's Judge Toko Sarita does the
human trafficking.
The trafficking court. These courts have, I think, humanized our judiciary, and a lot of different judges might get rotated in there. And if I'm doing it and then they appear at the graduation, I think it had a really good effect on them seeing all of the people and hearing the stories. I think dissuaded a lot of judges from maybe an instinct that they might have had to send people to jail when jail was not really solving the problem. So
that's kind of the easy way out. It's easy to put somebody in jail, and that
exactly
kicks a can down the road a little bit, but maybe
right.
doesn't achieve much. And that
it's a very expedient thing to do, because taking the time. I mean, you send somebody to jail, that case is over for that judge. you send someone to drug treatment, I got to then see that defendant to monitor him, 30, 40 other times,
Mm-hmm.
and if there's problems, even longer. Like we monitor like for a full year, once or twice a month. And so there's at least 12 times where you're monitoring, and it extends the case. But that's the best result in the long run, because that person is less likely to come back and recidivate. So.
You're doing a wonderful job of illustrating the topic we started with, which is empathy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and I still think that empathy is the best attribute a judge can have, with humility and all of those things, all of the cousins of empathy.
Let's turn to your new job, if I may. By my count, you are the 11th person to hold that position of chief administrative judge. Why did you want that job?
That's a long story, and you are assuming a fact, not an evidence, Mr. Carr. So I was administrator for 9 years in Queens, and my last few years was COVID, thing, and I felt a little burnt out by the whole process, and maybe I stood too long. Then I got appointed to the appellate division. I had the best job in the world, John. Sat in the second department. It was a peaceful existence. You did your work. It was intellectually challenging, and I had no intention of leaving. I loved what I was doing. I was working for PJ Hector Lasalle, extraordinary leader in our courts, and very, you basically, it's a peaceful life. Yeah, you have your run-ins with the judges when you're deciding a case, and sometimes you disagree. But it was a wonderful life. It turns out that my wife, who was a OBGYN nurse and a postpartum nurse for 30-something years, had retired and took care of COVID patients, had retired just a month or two after I got the appointment to the appellate division. So she was also home. We have 5 grandkids, and it was just a wonderful. Everything was smooth. The appellate division, my wife keeps reminding me, was my end game. That I hustled and ran for Supreme, all of that, and so this idea where you say I wanted this job, I didn't want this job, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I don't mean that in a way to suggest that I don't love the job now, but I did not want the job. Folks had been reaching out to me to put in for the chief judge's job, especially after Hector Lasalle was so unfairly treated, and the vote came down. And I'm not interested. I'm happy at the appellate division. And then people would come to me and say, hey, well, if you're not going to put in for the chief judge's job, would you consider being the chief administrative judge? And I said, no, that's even worse. It's back to administration. I've done that. And a lot of lobbying on other people's behalf to get me to do it. And I hope the chief doesn't mind me sharing this story. I've shared it publicly anyway. But the chief, before he was appointed, but he knew he was going to get appointed, calls a dinner with me and says, and we weren't friends, but we knew each other from different events and had talks. And I was a big fan of his, obviously, read his cases and everything. And we had dinner with a third party as well, and sort of set it up. And that day I'm leaving. I just had sat that day on the appellate division. I pull into my driveway. I see a text. Joe, I need you to come back to Manhattan to have lunch with Judge Wilson. I said, what about? Well, he's going to be our next chief judge, and he wants to talk to you about you taking the chief administrative judge spot. So I tell my friend, listen, if the new chief is asking me to meet him, I'm not saying no. I'll have a meeting with him. I'll have dinner with him, because FaceTime with the chief judge. Why would I not want to do that, right? but I'm just letting you know it's going to be a hard no. I really don't want to do that job. And he said, my friend said, well, why don't you just hear him out? Hear the chief judge out. So go back in the house, tell my wife, sweetie, um, uh, they want me to do this. They're asking me again about the chief administrative judge job. But I'm telling you, sweetie, it's going to be a hard no. I said, and she rolls her eyes, and then I say, but at the very least, at worst, I'm going to tell them I need to talk to my wife first. So anyway, I go in, and he has just a wonderful disposition, and in everything I knew about him, people who are people who are really smart, right, and kind, and good tacticians, get things done, are really appealing to me, in terms of who I might want to work for. And during that lunch, that dinner, I was getting persuaded that this might be something that I wanted. I still accuse him of hypnotizing me that day, because I went in thinking I ain't taking this job, and by the time I left and we talked through, I realized that my vision about what a court system should look like, my vision of justice, of how to dispense it, how to run OCA, was perfectly aligned with the chief. I realized that at that dinner, so somehow I left thinking like, oh wow, maybe this is a possibility. Maybe this is going to happen. I drive home. I meet with my wife again. She sees it all over my face, and I said, well, let me just pray about it. Let me think about it. And I told Judge Wilson, like, give me a few days, give me the weekend. This was a Thursday, so then my mentor is Judge Acosta, Rolando Acosta, because I clerked for him. Next morning, we meet with Judge Acosta and his wife, Basti, who's a doctor of education, PhD in education, and started charter schools. Brilliant woman. My wife's great friends with him. I was Judge Acosta's clerk, but we became best friends. We vacationed together. So he's my sort of guy that I go to when I need, to get advice, especially about big things like this. And we talked to them, had breakfast with them. The things that happened to Judge Lasalle, really devastated the Latino community, but the Latino community generally, but also the legal community. And in the meantime, I knew Rolando was leaving because he was going to go. Judge Acosta was leaving to Pillsbury, and so this idea that Judge Lasalle wasn't getting, that what happened to him, the gut punch that the Latino community had to endure with what happened to him, plus Rolando was leaving a real vacuum in leadership in OCA. So that was one of the things Judge Acosta and I discussed, and we felt like, and my wife as well. She was concerned that the Latino community, especially the judges, et cetera, needed to be inspired in some way, and this would make history. And somehow, before I knew it, we agreed, yeah, maybe this is something we need to do. Me and my wife told Rolando and his wife, all right, we'll pray for it. We'll pray over it another night or two, and on the drive back from Manhattan to Queens, where we live, my wife leans over and says, by the way, are they going to let you keep your chambers in Queens if you take this job? And I start laughing hysterically. And she said, what are you laughing at? I said, I am the day. I'm they. I will let myself keep those damn chambers in Queens. And there was something about that made me realize, like, wait a minute, I'm going to be the person who's deciding all of this, And if I want to keep chambers in Queens, I'll keep chambers in Queens. I'm in Beaver Street today. I have chambers in the Chief Judge's chambers on Park Avenue. But we prayed about it. We talked about it a lot. And Saturday during the day sometime, or maybe it was Sunday, I called the chief. I said, Chief, I am so honored that you would ask me to be the chief administrative judge. And I said, and I'm honored to serve under you. Those were the words I used. And he stopped me right away and he said, Joe, no, stop. You're not serving under me. I didn't choose you to serve under me. I chose you to serve side by side with me. I want a collaborative leadership team. I want to work together. You're not, and there I knew, wow, I made the right decision. And he's just an incredible leader, and brilliant. People talk about his brilliance in his decisions, but even as an administrator of the courts, because that's the second hat he wears. He is so smart. His instincts are right on, and I'm so impressed with him, and I'm so happy and proud to be working with him.
Well, it seems to have been the right decision because I've noticed that every single picture I've seen of you since you became chief administrative judge, you are smiling from ear to ear. Which is historically unusual because most of your predecessors quit after 2 or 3 years.
Yes, yeah, right, yeah. That might also. That comes from, and my son works for the court system too, and one of the things when he asked me for advice is, I smile a lot, and because it disarms people. I did it in the courtroom, like when a defendant is coming before me. They call the case, and I see him so anxious, and he might have been charged with something egregious. But and lawyers too, like if a lawyer's approaching and I'm noticing that they're a little, maybe they're not, it's their first time or the second time they're anxious, I start out by smiling at them, and it's disarming for people, But when I first took the bench, it's funny you say that because when I first took the bench, I practiced in the Queens County criminal court that I was first assigned to. So I knew a lot of the players. It was years later, but I knew a lot of the litigants. And somebody came up to me and said, "Well, are your jaws hurting?" I said, "No. Well, why are you saying?" And he said, "You've been smiling. You have not stopped smiling since you took the bench 30 days ago." So, but it's also a feeling of gratitude. Here I was, a kid who grew up in the projects, big Puerto Rican family, never imagined that I could, become a lawyer, much less a judge, much less an appellate judge, much less the chief administrative judge. So I feel really, really blessed, and that's where the smile comes. It's very easy for me to smile because I feel so blessed with, not only professionally, have a beautiful wife at 40 years, 5 grandkids, 3 adult kids. What do I have not to smile about? So.
What a great attitude. Now you have inherited quite the task, as you well know. You've got,
right.
15,000 employees to worry about, 3,500 judges, an enormous budget. Probably a dozen labor unions to negotiate with. What are your immediate priorities?
So I officially have been in this position for 2 months now, 2 months and a day or two, right? So my immediate priority is to put the right people in the right place to help me to lead. You heard me say earlier that the chief judge and I believe strongly in collaborative leadership, right? Leadership from the bottom up, not the top down. And so my main priority has been to put together a team that can implement the vision that the chief and I have. So one of the first things I did is appointed Deputy Chief Administrative Judge St. George, who was leading the courts outside of New York. And I felt that this new vision that we had required me to have a first deputy because I needed somebody who can work at Beaver Street, be a presence at Beaver Street, deal with all the changes we wanted to make at Beaver Street in terms of how we were going to structure things, et cetera, and that I needed to restore. I knew I would be busy trying to restore a lot of the broken relationships with the legislature. I mean, it's so obvious to me if you've been, and I know you have reading the news about that, the broken relationship with the governor's office, broken relationship, for crying out loud, with the judges, across the state. Morale was just terrible, and then broken relationships with the public. And I saw that my role I needed to be focused on that, and my priority was to put a team in place, which of the best people possible. St. George, to me, is like one of the most organized people. I mean, he hasn't been in the military, I understand, but he is so organized, so on top of everything, and is doing an incredible job. I told him the other day, I said, my friend, I do not know if I would have been able to do this job without you. But then we have Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Richardson, Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Kaplan, and we brought on Deputy Chief Administrative Judge Murphy, who was an upstate judge, AJ in one of the upstate courts. And so that was my main goal, was to put that team together, and that team is doing phenomenal. So the other main priority was to build morale and to start being supportive of the judges. That's one of our main priorities, is to be supportive of the judges. OCA is there not to tell judges what to do, but to be supportive of the judges. And so we are seeking to make sure that OCA's goals and ambitions and what we expect to do are aligned with what the judges' goals are. And because we think we actually do have extraordinary respect for what they do, for what judges do, and their independence, et cetera, et cetera. And so we want to be able to work more closely with them. We want to support them. We want to know what they need to do their jobs better. And we think that that's going to produce better outcomes when it comes to dispensing justice and supporting the judges. And then the other thing is, I believe that judges are being treated unfairly in the press, and I feel, and people are saying all sorts of things, and so one of the things I want to do is change the image that judges have, the unfair treatment that they receive, and protect our independence and our being the third branch of government and protecting that.
That's quite an agenda. What should the judges and staff know about you?
So, that I am accessible, that I am always accessible. Respect for, Jonathan Littman and Gail Prudenti and Larry Marks, and I recognize I have big shoes to fill. But I was a judge for 20 years. Like, I worked in the lower court and criminal court. I worked as an acting Supreme Court judge. I worked in the court of, as a court of claims judge. I worked as a Supreme Court judge doing trials. I've done hundreds and hundreds. I did the work the judges do. And then I went to the appellate division. So I think I bring to this position sort of, again, maybe empathy and a completely different perspective as to what judges actually do on the ground, that I am one of them. I am one of you. And that I treat people with kindness and respect. This is all about relationship building relationships as the administrative judge, getting their input on things, showing them respect, talking to them, trying to, if someone's going through an issue, being empathetic to them and being helpful to them in any way you can. And I know that because I did that for 8 years in Queens, and I honestly felt that those judges were my friends. They were my brothers. They were my brothers and sisters. And like when I became the AJ of criminal term in Queens, I was young. I was 52, I think, but I was one of the youngest Supreme Court judges on the bench there. So here I am, assigned to be their AJ. And so the first thing I did was set up lunches with the elder statesmen and stateswomen, the senior judges, and took them to lunch at my damn expense. Happily took them to lunch, and basically got their input. They'd been doing this for years, and I would ask them, like, okay, so what do I need to do to be a good leader here? What needs to change? How can I make us more productive? What are we going to do about the backlog? And for weeks, week after week after week, I would take one of those judges out to lunch, and it was not false humility. I honestly wanted to know, and took a lot of the things they told me and took their advice. And but by the time I was the AJ for 2 or 3 years, where they saw I was in the courtroom, sometimes I did more trials than they did, and handled more cases than they did more dispositions than they did. They saw me doing the work. I honestly felt like those were my friends, and they would do anything that I want. So I hope that's if people are asked about who's Joe Zayas, what do you think about him, those are the types of things that they would say about me.
I asked you and the Chief Judge the same question. I asked each of you, what should the judges and what should the staff know about you? And you both answered me in a slightly different way. His answer was that I care about them. Your answer was that I am one of them. And those two statements seem to sum up exactly what your management approach is going to be.
Right. Yeah. And as I said, like, it became very obvious to me, and every day it becomes even more obvious that me and the Chief Judge are aligned. We are just naturally aligned. I don't know how we got there, but I have not disagreed with a single thing that he wants to do, and he hasn't disagreed with any of the big things that I might want to do. But we really are aligned in our big goals.
That's great to hear, and that's a wonderful place to end. Judge, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your service.
Sure, absolutely. You're welcome, John. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.